Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Novara Live. I'm your host, Dalia Gebrial, and I'm thrilled to be joined by the beautiful Ash Sarkar. Ash, how are you doing, my love?
I love being objectified in the workplace when it's you, Dalia.
Anytime, my love, anytime. Right, coming up tonight, Israel threatens Iran with military action. Zohran Mamdani is surging in mayoral polls, and a third night of rioting in Ballymena is causing even more unrest. Now, I haven't hosted Novara Live since we kicked off our fundraiser last week. And what I've heard is that you guys have been completely amazing. We asked 1,000 of you to back our work by signing up as a monthly supporter, and you guys didn't hold back. We're so grateful to all of you who have decided to help us build a new media for a different politics. Our Novara Live audience is incredibly dedicated, but we still need just 100 more of you to join us and take us to the target of 1,000 new supporters. I have been involved in the Novara project in some shape or form for nearly 10 years now. And if you had told me 10 years ago, if you'd shown me a snapshot into the future 10 years ago, I would have probably been deeply horrified by the shifts in the political landscape. But I also would have been in awe of the fact that Novara is still standing, it's growing, it's still independent. I wouldn't have believed that something built from the ground up, a grassroots media organization could become a real significant voice in the media landscape in this country. And the only way we've done that is through the commitment of our supporters. So thank you so much. And please tell your mum, tell your dad, brothers, sisters, mates to sign up and make us go for another 10 years and more. So if you're able to, please do consider signing up, you, anyone else, at novaramedia.com/support. We really can't do any of this without you. So go to novaramedia.com/support to build a new media for a different politics. US media has reported that Israel is poised to carry out an imminent attack on Iran, with some reports suggesting it could happen today. The reports from US channels NBC and CBS came just hours after Washington ordered all non-essential embassy staff to leave Iraq. Staff and family members in Bahrain and Kuwait are also being evacuated. The move comes in response to Iran threatening to strike US bases in the region if a conflict breaks out, with the country's defense minister Aziz Nasirzadeh saying this: "All its bases are within our reach. We have access to them, and without hesitation, we will target all of them in host countries. God willing, things won't reach that point, and the talks will succeed." Tensions in the region have risen in recent days as talks between the US and Iran over the country's nuclear development hit an impasse. At the same time, the International Atomic Energy Agency, which is the world's nuclear watchdog, declared that Iran was in breach of its obligations not to proliferate nuclear weapons. 19 of the IAEA's 33 board members voted in favor of the decision, including the US, UK, and France. In their statement, the IAEA said this: "The Board of Governors finds that Iran's many failures to uphold its obligations since 2019 to provide the agency with full and timely cooperation regarding undeclared nuclear material and activities at multiple undeclared locations in Iran constitutes non-compliance with its obligations under its safeguards agreements with the agency." In 2015, Iran signed a nuclear monitoring agreement with 6 world powers, agreeing to limit its nuclear development while allowing the IAEA to monitor its sites. That was in exchange for relief from the crippling economic sanctions imposed on the country. But in 2018, US President Donald Trump tore up that agreement, saying it didn't do enough to prevent Iran from developing nuclear weapons, and imposed fresh US sanctions. In response, Iran increased its nuclear activities. Iran has now condemned the IAEA's new decision as political and has pledged to open a new uranium enrichment plant in response. The country has also said it will upgrade the centrifuges used at its enrichment site in Fordow. Now, negotiations between the US and Iran over Tehran's nuclear program have been going on for months. Back in March, US President Donald Trump threatened to bomb Iran unless they struck a deal on the nuclear program. At the same time, Israel was proposing an attack on Iran's nuclear sites instead of negotiations, a plan that Trump initially dismissed. And earlier this week, the Times of Israel reported that Trump had told Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu in a phone call that an Israeli strike against Iran needed to be taken off the table. At a Washington event last night, Trump was asked about the heightened tensions.
Give us an update on Iran. Because you're in charge.
Say it again.
Yes, a question from Newsmax. Could you provide an update on Iran? We're hearing reports that U.S. personnel are being moved out of the region within striking distance.
Well, they are being moved out because it could be a dangerous place, and we'll see what happens. But they are being, we've given notice to move out, and we'll see what happens.
Is there anything that can be done to dial the temperature down in the region?
They can't have a nuclear weapon. Very simple. They can't have a nuclear weapon. We're not going to allow that.
Meanwhile, Iran's president, Masoud Pezeshkian, has also commented saying this: "I don't know how to cooperate with the outside world to stop them from doing evil acts and let the people live independently in this country. We will continue down our own path. We will have enrichment." Ash, I wanted to ask you, obviously what's happening in Palestine is part and parcel of this escalation, and it seems that whether or not there should be further aggression against Iran is actually a point of slight departure between Trump and Netanyahu. What do you make of these kind of recent escalations? It seems like this has been happening somewhat cyclically over the past sort of 12 to 18 months.
I think that actually you have to go back a bit further to really identify what the window of opportunity for Netanyahu was. And I think that you've got to go back to the withdrawal by Biden of troops from Afghanistan, because what that signaled really is that the US was going to step back as being, the military hegemon in the Middle East. And there was an opportunity for Israel to carve out a more independent foreign policy from the United States. The genocidal war in Gaza is one such example, but so is the ground invasion of Lebanon, the pushing back of Hezbollah across the Litani, strikes on Yemen, and then also the strikes on Iranian targets that we saw last year. And I think that there was a sort of understanding of what would be the word appropriate, what would be acceptable to Trump would be, something which could further inhibit an Iranian nuclear program. That would be acceptable, even if there is some endangering of American shipping interests. That would be okay, but a sizable military conflict between Iran and Israel would just be hugely detrimental to American interests as well, not to mention what the cost in civilian life would be and the impact in terms of the displacement of that many people. I mean, we've seen how the Syrian civil war led to an absolutely historic refugee crisis. I mean, imagine what happens if it's Iran, a country which is much bigger and also has a much more developed and substantial military industrial complex. I mean, it's complete madness what Netanyahu would like to do if he was fully unleashed. I think identifying this tension, this area of disagreement between Washington and Tel Aviv, is that I think that Netanyahu has consistently made certain gambles, which is if he moves, he can pull America in behind him. This was a comment he made, I think, in the early 2000s, which is, I know what America is. It is a thing that moves. And I think that what his hope would be is that you would achieve some kind of profound impact on Iranian nuclear capacity and also their ability to keep producing other forms of weaponry, including things like the Shahed drones. If you could pull in US troops behind you, I think that would ultimately be his aim. But that puts him at odds with, I think, Trump's view of foreign policy, which is sure be an apex predator, have a big stick. If bitten, bite back twice as hard. But something which is quite core to the MAGA cause is not wanting any more adventurous warfare. I think that's something which is part of his electoral coalition, and I'm not sure how easily he'd give that up.
Yeah, absolutely. We do have increasing, I mean, Marjorie Taylor Greene, who is kind of one of his big supporters, tweeted today sort of against neocons and against this foreign intervention from the US. There is this split within Trump's coalition around this question. It's obviously often quite difficult to know where Trump truly stands on these questions. It's all about what will work politically for him. And I think for him, at this point, following Netanyahu into a regional war would not be politically savvy for him. But it also goes to show how Netanyahu's agenda in the Middle East is not just confined to Gaza or the West Bank, but it is kind of an existential regional question. 26 Palestinians in Gaza have been killed by Israel while waiting for basic food supplies distributed by the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation. That's the Israel-controlled American organization that employs CIA-linked mercenaries to distribute minimal quantities of aid to Palestinians in the Strip. Crowds were seen running from the distribution center set up near a checkpoint on the Netzarim corridor in central Gaza as Israeli soldiers opened fire. We have also seen footage, too graphic to show here, of several small children killed and horribly wounded in a missile attack on the Al-Mawasi area. That's the so-called safe area into which Israel has been forcing an increasing number of Palestinians, though of course nowhere is safe in Gaza. Now, those kinds of images and footage are exactly what Israel doesn't want the world to see, which may explain this. So here we can see all communications with the Strip have been completely cut off after Israeli strikes targeted vital telecom infrastructure in the Strip. That led the UN's relief agency for Palestinians, UNRWA, to post this troubling message. We have lost all contact with our UNRWA colleagues in Gaza. Communications have been cut off. This morning, for the first time in months, we did not receive their morning messages to say good morning and we are fine/alive. So Israel is starving Palestinians, then shooting them when they try to get food, and then stopping us from seeing them do it. And of course, Israel is not doing all that alone. It has the support of the US, as well as much of the West, including our own government here in the UK. Declassified has reported repeatedly on RAF spy missions flying over Gaza from an RAF base in Cyprus. They've also reported on the extent of British arms sales to Israel, most recently revealing that British firm Poised Industries has sent over 1,000 munitions boxes to Israeli weapons company Elbit Systems since October 2023, weighing over 100 tons in total. And last October, Declassified reported on how the UK is also training Israeli military personnel in Britain, a fact that Keir Starmer's government refused to disclose. Well, now, one Labour MP has forced an answer from the government. Earlier this month, Rachel Maskell tabled a ministerial question asking the Defence Secretary the last time a member of the Israeli military was trained by the UK Armed Forces. And the answer is, well, shocking. On Wednesday, Defence Minister Luke Pollard confirmed that the British military is right now training a, quote, limited number of Israel Defence Force personnel on UK-based training courses. That led former Labour leader Jeremy Corbyn to say this. This is a shocking, damning admission. The UK is arming Israel. It is conducting surveillance flights for Israel. It is training military personnel for Israel. A full, independent public inquiry into the UK's complicity in the Gaza genocide cannot come soon enough. The support that the UK continues to give to Israel means it's complicit in the horror of this genocide in Gaza. More than 55,000 people have been killed by Israel in the Strip, with Israel killing a Palestinian child every 45 minutes. That's over 30 children's lives cut tragically short every day since Israel's assault began. We recently reported on how 9 of those murdered children came from the same family. Dr. Ala al-Najjar was working at the Nasser hospital in Khan Yunis when an Israeli bomb destroyed her home. Inside were all 10 of her children, along with her husband Hamdi, who was also a doctor working at Nasser. 9 of her children, ranging in age from 7 months to 12 years old, were killed. Ala was at the hospital when the charred remains of 7 of her children were brought in. 2 were later found in the rubble, and her husband later died in hospital from his injuries. Her sole surviving family member, 11-year-old Adam, suffered multiple injuries. Ala and Adam, along with other critically injured children, have now been taken by ambulance to an airport in Eilat on the Red Sea and then flown to Milan on a plane chartered by the Italian government. The World Health Organization have now released this short interview with Adam, shot before he and his mum left for Italy.
أول حاجة كنا في الدار كنا قاعدين عادي طبيعي.
We were at home. Everything was normal. Then they launched a missile at our building. Smoke came out, and another missile hit us and leveled the entire building to the ground. There were a group of energy panels on the roof. They all collapsed to the ground, only 1 or 2 left. All my brothers were killed, my father too. May God have mercy on him. Mum and I, God willing, will travel to Italy. God willing, I will carry on. I will complete my treatment. God willing, God will heal me. You know, God willing, I will live with my family in Egypt. God willing, Mum and I.
Ash, I mean, it feels like it's sort of the 100th video I've seen of a child describing something that, I mean, is just so catastrophic. It's unbelievable. I can't imagine any adult being able to cope with that, let alone a child. I mean, what do you make of, we always knew that the British government is complicit in what is happening in Gaza through financial, political legitimization. What do you make of the idea that right now in this land that we're on, IDF soldiers are potentially being trained, are in fact definitely being trained by the British Army?
I'm going to say something which maybe sounds a bit weird at first, but trust me with where I'm going with this. Here's something that pro-Israeli advocates are entirely correct about. And it's this. When the UK government announced that it was sanctioning 2 members of Netanyahu's government, Itamar Ben-Gvir and Bezalel Smotrich, for their horrible words, apparently, their horrible, insightful words. Also, sanctioning one of the individuals who was depicted in Louis Theroux's documentary about illegal settlements. One of the things that Israel's advocates said is, well, you don't sanction your allies. Why are you sanctioning your allies? The fact is that Israel remains a close partner of the British government in pretty much every meaningful way. So the F-35 carve-outs for arms sales, you have a small number of components and munitions being restricted by David Lammy, but you've got carve-outs for the components, which I think are probably most important, all right? These F-35 jets, which rain down bombs on refugee camps, schools, hospitals, and the Gazan people in general. You sanction 2 of the more obnoxious members of Netanyahu's cabinet, the most openly extreme members of the government. But in terms of Netanyahu himself, well, David Lammy's still quite happy to fly over to Israel and to, shake his hand and shake the hand of the Israeli president. Similarly, Labour Friends of Israel, they're happy to board a plane and go over and pose for all the photo ops. There is a not just shallowness, a cynicism to how flimsy this Labour government's measures to take action on the Israeli government have been, because it's basically a form of PR. It's basically a form of attempted, and I would say wholly inadequate electoral management. What they hope is that if you announce some, paltry sanctions here and there, that maybe you'll be able to save Wes Streeting in Ilford North, who of course was just 500 votes shy of losing his seat at the last general election to Liane Mohammed, an independent candidate who has taken a really strong stance on Gaza. So the fact that we've still been running reconnaissance flights, the fact that we've been training members of the IDF, the fact that we still trade with Israeli companies and corporations, particularly those involved in data and surveillance, the fact that we still refuse as a government to recognize the fact that a genocide is taking place, which would mean that we've got legal obligations and duties. The fact that when a vessel flying a UK naval flag, the Madeleine, was boarded in international waters by Israeli forces who have absolutely no jurisdiction there, and its crew forcibly taken off it and detained. The fact that the British government sort of went, oh, nothing to do with us, Gov, I think shows that they've got absolutely no interest beyond the most, shallow and insipid measures to try and deal with their own voters. That's the only thing that's driven them into even these, half-inch centimeter steps. But the fact that the core of the truth remains the case that Israel is one of the UK's, closest allies, and all of these tiny micro steps of, wagging a finger and going, oh, Mr. Netanyahu, that simply won't do. All of that is intended to preserve that military and trading and diplomatic relationship between the UK government and the Israeli state.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's this attempt to kind of peel off what they call extreme West Bank settlers, away from the meat and bones of the Israeli state. When, as outrageous as their public statements are, Smotrich and Ben-Gvir are not the head of the Israeli state. They're not the ones who are the driving force. I mean, they could be considered to be implicitly as part of the kind of coalition of the state to be a driving force behind the scenes that are so deeply revolting to so many of us. But they're actually not the ones that are in charge. It is Netanyahu and the Israeli state as a whole that is in charge. And so this attempt to kind of peel off and sort of scapegoat or distance yourself from accountability through exceptionalizing these particular ministers or these particular settlers, it really is, it's giving the optics of action in order to placate the mounting public pressure that, as much as they are trying to make it seem, people, politicians are feeling. By giving you're giving the optics of action whilst not only not taking any action, but actually continuing to enable this state to conduct a genocide. I mean, it's not just Smotrich and Ben-Gvir that have been sanctioned by the Supreme Court, by the ICC. It's also Netanyahu himself. And I mean, I don't think anyone's buying it, but I think it's almost, it's a distancing of accountability that will not be viewed positively by history. Progressive New York City mayoral candidate Zohran Mamdani is now ahead in the polls, surpassing establishment candidate and disgraced former governor Andrew Cuomo for the first time. With just 2 weeks to go until the Democratic primary, polls indicate Mamdani is beating Cuomo at 35 to 31%, which is narrowly within the 4% margin of error. And given that the Democratic pick is overwhelmingly likely to become the next city mayor, things are looking good for Mamdani. Now, Mamdani is a member of the Democratic Socialists of America, and his insurgent campaign has been centered around affordable housing, the cost of living, and, quote, Trump-proofing New York City. Although many of the headlines have focused around Mamdani's pro-Palestine position. When asked about whether he believed in Israel's right to exist as a Jewish state, he replied that he believes in its right to exist as an equal state. This was a stark contrast to Cuomo, a longtime and vocal supporter of Zionism and the Israeli state. And for those who might have forgotten, Andrew Cuomo was forced to resign as New York governor in 2021 after allegations of sexual harassment from multiple women. Now, Mamdani's surge is significant and comes following a somewhat delayed endorsement from Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. And despite public bravado, it seems Cuomo's campaign are feeling the heat. According to a post by Mamdani on Twitter, Cuomo's super PAC just sent out this mailer. You can see there, it appears that the image of Mamdani has been slightly altered to lengthen and darken the beard of what would be the first Muslim mayor of New York. Now, we obviously can't confirm whether or not this was deliberate, but it is a move that Mamdani described as blatant Islamophobia. As well as running a mass volunteer-run door-knocking operation, Mamdani has also become known for his savvy social media presence, with campaign videos like this one.
New York Mayor Eric Adams has been indicted by a federal grand jury.
Every politician says New York is the greatest city on the globe.
But what good is that if no one can afford to live here? City Hall is engulfed in corruption.
Unscientific report.
The cost of living is the real crisis. New Yorkers are being crushed by rent and childcare. The slowest buses in the nation are robbing us of our time and our sanity. Working people are being pushed out of the city they built. A mayor could change this, and that's why I'm running. I'll make buses fast and free.
So I can just get where I'm going.
I'll make childcare available to all New Yorkers at no cost.
I want to raise my kid in New York.
And I'll freeze the rent for every single rent-stabilized tenant.
These Eric Adams rent hikes are killing us.
Life in this city doesn't need to be this hard. But politicians like Eric Adams and Andrew Cuomo want it to be this way. They care about their donors. They care about themselves. They don't care about you, the working class who keep this city running. This campaign is for every New Yorker who believes in the dignity of their neighbors. And the government's job is to actually make our lives better. We can afford to bring down the rent, have world-class public transit, and make it easier to raise a family. We can do all of that and so much more, because this is New York. We can afford to dream.
Oof, that New York City Riz always gets me a little hot under the collar. One interesting thing I found out in my research actually is that his middle name is Kwame after Kwame Nkrumah. Pretty cool parents. What's also really interesting about this race is that the data indicates that much of the divide between Cuomo and Mamdani is falling along generational lines, with voters over 50 cleaving towards Cuomo and voters under 50 cleaving towards Mamdani. Cuomo also has more support amongst Black voters, with Mamdani leading amongst white voters, Asian voters, and those with a college degree. If elected, Mamdani would be the youngest New York mayor in a century. To discuss the latest polling, I spoke earlier to Aaron Eisenberg, political director of the United Auto Workers Union. I began by asking him why the UAW decided to endorse Mamdani for their candidate for mayor.
The UAW Region 9A, we actually started a Democratic endorsement process back in September, October of last year. We knew that coming out of the presidential election, we knew this election was going to be the next biggest election, especially in New York City for our 20,000 members here. And we did member surveys for what issues would be most important to our members, asked members for questions. Then we did member leaders leading interview forums with all of the candidates that wanted our endorsement. This 2-month-long process ended up with a triple endorsement of Zohran Mamdani, Brad Lander, and Jessica Ramos at the time. Those were candidates that we had all had experience with. Zohran Mamdani at the time had been on every single one of our 7 different locals in New York City's picket lines. And so despite having less experience with us in some ways, we knew, especially in addition to his relentless pursuit of affordability, that he was someone who was going to stand with us when the moment got tough. And so that happened back in November, December. We were the first trade union to endorse Zohran. And we helped try to bring other progressive groups, trade unions, pro-worker groups along with us. And then a few weeks ago, we did another survey of our membership, and unanimously endorsed Zohran Mamdani first in the New York City mayor's race. And since then, he's only surged up the polls, and it's really wonderful. Our members have been out in full force for him. And we have the second debate tonight, and we'll see how it goes.
Yeah, and I mean, speaking of those poll numbers, are you surprised by these latest poll figures? What do you think it tells us about the New York City landscape, the political landscape of New York City, given that this is quite a surprise surge?
Yeah, I mean, I think we knew the race would tighten a bit. Andrew Cuomo was running a lot on name recognition, people remembering both himself and his father. And he was running kind of a Joe Biden waited out strategy. And people in New York don't necessarily watch them. They're not like political junkies like myself who do this for a living. They're not looking at the election 7 months out. They're looking at it 1 month out. And in that time, they're looking to see a candidate that's going to focus on the issues. And Zohran Mamdani has focused relentlessly on affordability. It's really been the focus of this race. And instead of a race like 2021, where the focus was solely on public safety and crime in a reactionary framework, he's made it and shifted the dialogue in this race to focus on affordability, on the 3 things that he's focused on. Freezing the rent, universal childcare, and fast and free buses have galvanized people across the city and recognizing that we can have a better world. You see the sign above me. We say this in the UAW: fight for our future. I mean, Zohran keeps talking about how we have an opportunity for a New York for our future generations, or we have the chance to go back to what got us into this mess. It's really kind of a dichotomy that's on the ballot here in New York City. And with the ranked choice, people are seeing real coalitions forming. The Working Families Party, for example, has endorsed a full slate with explicit instructions following our lead to not rank Andrew Cuomo. And so, but in doing so, even if in the first round Andrew Cuomo was up, there's a chance for him to lose in the second, third, fourth, fifth, seventh, eighth round in this. Last time, for example, it was only 7,000 votes that separated Eric Adams from the second place person, despite starting out at 30% to 19%. There's a real chance with ranked choice for creating these coalitions of the willing that will focus on the real issues and bring us forward. And Zohran Mamdani is at the forefront of that.
And I mean, I don't know how much insight you have into the campaign, but if you could guess, what do you think it is about the campaign? What are the strategies that have enabled Mamdani to build those coalitions and make up this ground in a context where there is such an imbalance of name recognition, which we know typically is what wins elections, particularly at the local level?
Yeah, I think it's something that New Yorkers all kind of feel affinity for: hustle and grind. Zohran is at 7 events by noon and another 6 in the next 4 hours. He's everywhere across the city, and his team is putting out video after video showing him every single place, highlighting his policies, making them affordable, digestible, and making them something that people want to believe in, seeing people as part of a movement. We've had hundreds of UAW members turn out for Zohran canvas shifts and flyerings and things of that nature, phone banks. But across the city, there have been 25,000 to 30,000 volunteers for Zohran's campaign. And so that organic energy also picks up on its own. You walk down the street. We were shooting a UAW for Zohran video yesterday, an advertisement. And so I was wearing a UAW for Zohran shirt, walking down the street, and I got tons of compliments. I got tons of people pointing it out, saying, "Oh, I've just seen that guy." And so name recognition goes a long way. However, there's major unfavorable name recognition. In unions, we stand up to harassers. Andrew Cuomo has been credibly accused of harassment many times over. We stand up against bosses that are bad. And so it's kind of something where Zohran is fighting for a better future. He's on picket lines. He's standing with workers. He's fighting for fast and free buses. He's highlighting the struggle that New Yorkers are facing on a daily basis. And so that's galvanized the electorate to kind of support him in this.
A lot of the headlines that have been generated in this mayoral race have been about the vast differences between Cuomo and Mamdani when it comes to Israel. What part of Mamdani's platform do you think has actually really resonated the most with New Yorkers? Do you think Palestine has been part of that, or do you think it's something else?
I wouldn't say it's nothing, but I really think it is the relentless focus on affordability, front and center, over and over again. Message discipline is something that we've seen on the national stage in Bernie Sanders here in the US, where if you repeat the same message over and over and over again, and people kind of start to know it and get excited about it, it's something that people start wanting to buy into. And having a vision of a better future is really something that Zohran has enabled people to dream in New York City of. It was, I think, in his first stump speech, he talked about dreaming of a better New York and one where we don't need to struggle. And I think that's really picked up people. And so that focus on affordability, bringing it back to the key things that he's able to do as mayor, freezing the rents, fighting for universal childcare, which Bill de Blasio, our former mayor, was able to achieve $3K when childcare in New York City, I have 2 children under 3. I can tell you exactly what it costs. It's $25,000 a year on average for each child. How are working class people supposed to stay in New York City if rents continue to skyrocket and childcare is unaffordable? And so he brings it back to the workers that made the city great. It's something that everyone has a place in this city. Even an immigrant from Kampala, Uganda, who came at 7 years old, has a chance to be mayor of this city, just like him.
This is a local race, but it has gained a lot of national attention. What impact do you think Mamdani potentially winning this race could have on the national political stage in the US?
I mean, yes, it's a local race, but just for context, New York City's budget is larger than all but about 8 to 10 state budgets across the country. New York City's population is larger than about 30 states. New York City is by far the largest city in New York or in the US. Brooklyn alone would be the, I believe, 4th largest city in the country, and it's just one of our 5 boroughs here in New York. And so the scale is just outsized and impact is outsized. We're also the media capital of the country. We're the capital of the country. There's a lot of focus here on New York City. And as a result, the way the party goes forward, in addition to this being one of the first major elections post Donald Trump's second election here, and Kamala Harris and the search for what is the future of the Democratic Party, the relentless focus on like populist economics and focusing on specifically affordability and making the city and the country a place that working people can live is something that is undeniable, has caught on here, and I believe has real impact already has impact for how races are to be thought about around the country. And the digital native nature of Zohran's campaign and his ability to churn out video after video highlighting issues and not hiding from the press, but actually embracing the press and embracing these long form interviews and being able to speak in such elegance about these topics has really brought along even people that, as Eric Adams would say, would be haters at his table of success to his table of success. You know, it's people, haters who were his waiter are now people who are cheering him on. And it's something that Zohran has a unique ability to do and galvanize people on.
Now, on the topic of left-wing leaders, I wanted to remind you about a very exciting event coming up on Wednesday, the 25th of June. Novara's Aaron Bastani will be live and in conversation with French left-wing leader Jean-Luc Mélenchon for an episode of Downstream IRL, and that will be held at Earth Theatre in Hackney. Tickets are still available, but they're going fast, so do follow the link in the description to get one while you can. Racist riots on the streets of Ballymena in the north of Ireland have entered into their 3rd day. Last night, a leisure centre, which had been providing emergency shelter for migrant families displaced by the rioting, was set on fire. It is understood that there was nobody inside the centre during the attack. Stormont Justice Minister Naomi Long has called for an end to the, quote, festival of hate and destruction in which 41 people have been injured. The homes and businesses of immigrants have been targeted systematically by rioters, with some losing their homes to the violence. Migrant households have responded by displaying notes in their window in an attempt to ward off rioters. This, from The Guardian, is an image of a Czech family who have put up a Union Jack in their window. There's also this image, which has been circulating on Twitter. So as you can see there, it's a home with a sign in the window saying locals live here and I work in a care home. There's also a Northern Irish flag and the flag of the Philippines. So the reason for that Philippine flag there could be because the riots were sparked following an alleged sexual assault of a teenage girl by two 14-year-old boys believed to be of Romanian descent. Although it's worth noting that households of all nationalities, including Filipino, have been targeted. A vigil held for the girl turned violent after a crowd peeled off and began attacking homes believed to belong to immigrants in a nearby street. One resident speaking to The Guardian said this: "The riots have a valid point. We are being overpopulated. It sounds like I'm racist, but I'm not. It's like an invasion. I don't feel safe walking the streets anymore. Just yesterday, one of them was following me and eyeing me up." Another said this: "If they can terrorize our kids, we can terrorize the town. It's a way of getting our voices heard. If the government won't put them out, we'll put them out." Amnesty International's Northern Ireland director, Patrick Corrigan, said the following: "We are in the midst of a racist pogrom. Families have already lost their homes and lives may soon be lost unless the violence ends now. We are only a petrol bomb away from someone being killed. This violence is being fueled by racist hatred, stoked by disinformation on social media and amplified by politicians who irresponsibly conflate immigration with crime and social issues which affect all communities. We need politicians to speak truthfully about immigration, not echo vague concerns from the streets or false claims on social media that profit off lies." According to the 2021 census, only 3.4% of people in Northern Ireland are from minority ethnic backgrounds. That means 96.6% are not. We remain the whitest and least diverse part of the UK and Ireland. While immigration has gradually decreased over the last decade, crime rates have fallen, except for racially motivated hate crime, which is now higher than sectarian hate crime. People from immigrant and minoritized communities are far more likely to be victims of hate crime than anyone else. So to discuss the events in the north of Ireland, I am joined by Amanda Ferguson, who is a freelance journalist based in Belfast. Amanda, thank you so much for joining us today. I'm going to start by just asking you to talk about how things are looking on the ground in Ballymena at the moment.
Okay, I just wanted to start just with a few things that just need to be corrected. There were people inside the leisure centre in Larne whenever it was attacked. I was speaking to women who were in an exercise class and a brick came through the window and they all had to be ushered out the fire exit, and there were children in the swimming club that had just left and so on. So there were people really terrorised and traumatised by what had happened, and they told me that they felt unsafe and that they felt intimidated and frightened, and they said that the crowds outside the centre were behaving, as they said, like rabid animals. With regard to the flags and stickers that were in the windows of the houses in Ballymena, yes, some residents are doing that. However, I've been made aware in the course of today that it's not always the residents that want those, that it's been landlords and estate agents that have requested that. So that's just, you know, a bit of sort of information that wasn't in the public domain before. With regard to Ballymena, we've seen 3 days of pretty awful racist violence, and the violence last night perhaps wasn't as intense as the previous 2 days, but there's more potential for violence in Ballymena and in other locations. However, where I am sitting now, I can see the rain on the window outside, and even the most committed rioter can be tested by heavy rain in Ireland.
Yeah, I mean, thank you so much, Amanda, for those updates and for that clarification. I mean, it's really devastating to hear that there were people in that leisure centre. I can't imagine how terrifying that must have been for them. Could you give us a little bit more context on what has led to this moment? I mean, where do you see the origins of this anti-migrant sentiment comes from? And did these riots kind of take you by surprise?
Not overly surprised, but the intensity of it has been is really shocking and depressing. So we know that at the weekend, the 2 teenage boys were charged in relation to an alleged sexual offence, that they appeared in court. Now, following the legal proceedings, There was a solidarity vigil with the complainant, in that case, a teenage girl, and that was peaceful. And then in the evening after that, there was street disorder. Now, there has been street disorder in some other areas in Northern Ireland, and some people have been engaged in peaceful protest, but there's been a huge amount of conflation of issues. There have been issues raised around immigration and strain on housing and on resource allocation and public resources, and that's been mixed in with some really just very nakedly sort of racist rhetoric and people, essentially targeting people just because they're not white, just because they're not local. I was with some of the families that had to flee their home in the middle of the night, and they were terrified. People who are here working and living and trying to make their own way. The issue that we saw over the last 3 days, which could continue again tonight, I don't know what's going to happen. We'll have to wait and see. There was racist rioting last year in the aftermath of the Southport murders. We know that happened in Britain first, and then it took about a week of that happening in Britain before it happened in Northern Ireland. And, I was there as well. And whenever you were talking to people who were at what was described as very kindly described as anti-immigration protests, was people there were victims of misinformation and disinformation. And there were also people who were obviously racist, obviously fascist. There were people doing Nazi salutes. There was some involvement from paramilitary elements as well. And, that was a pretty shocking episode last summer. So, I'm sure that this is going to happen again at some point, which is disturbing as well. But the conflation of some of the issues and some of the responses from the political world have been pretty poor, or have been the subject of a lot of debate on the airwaves and so on over the last few days. But we're in the context of dealing with violence in the midst of being in a jurisdiction that has an under-resourced police service. Police officers from Scotland via the mutual aid arrangements are due to make their way to Northern Ireland at some point to provide assistance to the PSNI. And the police have been very clear on this, that there's no debate about the nature of these attacks. They are targeted towards ethnic minorities and also to police officers.
And kind of speaking about that response, which you touched on there, what has the response from politicians and, let's say, kind of the media more generally to these riots?
Well, there's a few issues going on at the minute. The DUP is the largest unionist party in Northern Ireland. Their communities minister is a man called Gordon Lyons, and he has been criticised today by the Alliance Party, the SDLP, Sinn Féin, the Secretary of State for Northern Ireland, members of the public, a whole range of people, Green Party, because he put a social media post out last night which referenced the location where people who had fled their homes in Ballymena had ended up in a Larne leisure centre. And then within a couple of hours of his social media post, the leisure centre was attacked. Now, Gordon Lyons has said that he issued his post, which included condemnation of violence because he wanted to stop misinformation with regard to what was happening at Larne Leisure Centre. However, other politicians in Northern Ireland have been very critical of his choices, and I know that that's going to be sort of debated in the days ahead, and calls for him to resign and all the rest of it. Everyone, regardless of political stripe, has been horrified by what they are seeing. However, what we have noticed is from some unionist political leaders, there has been some sort of blurry commentary on what's been going on that people have sort of raised their eyebrow at. And another thing that's happening is in all of the calls that we're having for people to talk about pressures around immigration and housing and access to public services and ending violence against women and girls, we have seen that the abuse of women and girls, we have seen babies and teenage girls and pregnant women and mothers and workers fleeing from their home and being targeted in the worst way just because they aren't white. So the idea that this is about ending violence against women and girls for the people that are engaged in the violence is just not the case. And then there's that blurry part of Northern Ireland life, about how much paramilitaries might be involved in what's going on. So it's a pretty complicated picture. And we also have to talk about the fact that this is happening only in particular communities. It's only at this point is only happening in working class Protestant, Unionist, Loyalist, British identifying areas within Northern Ireland. It's not something that's happening across the political spectrum, and that's a sort of challenge of a post-conflict society. And we have to ask questions if we're going to question everything else about why these protests are coming from that area. We know that the DUP leader Gavin Robinson has rejected the idea that there's a particular problem within loyalism around racial radicalisation at the minute, but I imagine that's going to be something that's debated more in the time ahead. But it really just has been thoroughly depressing, and most people just wanted to stop, not least the people who are being targeted. But it's having ramifications for Northern Ireland's place in the world, how it's viewed, tourism, businesses, a whole range of areas, commuters, public transport, and so on. We've had rioting in Northern Ireland in the past. We will have it again in the future. So there's a lot there's a lot to be discussed, and also, because of this political row that's happening, that causes a certain amount of instability up at Stormont, where we have that random system of government after the peace process of a mandatory power-sharing coalition government of parties that are diametrically opposed on most topics, which makes governing quite difficult. So there's a lot in the mix around this, but really the people I'm thinking about is those people who are directly affected, those people who are being targeted. And, people in Ireland know, whether it's Republic of Ireland, Northern Ireland, however you call the part of the world that I'm from, that Irish people have made their homes all over the world. There's a reason why there's an Irish pub in every corner of the world. There's a reason why whenever there's an international story that there's an Irish journalist or a doctor or medic or someone who's made their home elsewhere in the world. It's because we have been displaced by war and famine and economic opportunity and a whole range of issues. So it's very distressing for people who understand what it is to make your home somewhere else, for this to be happening where we live.
Manda, I know that you're not a fortune teller, you are a journalist, but I'm going to ask you this question anyway. When the dust settles, what impact do you think this is going to have, particularly on those communities, those ethnic minority and migrant communities, going forward? And what do you think needs to happen for trust and cohesion to be rebuilt?
Yeah, we need to take the viewpoint of people who aren't born in Northern Ireland, or who are people who are making their homes here. Because at the moment we really just concentrate on the constitutional question, on the orange and green politics about the future of this place in the world. And while most of us are comfortable with difference and embrace the richness of diversity and the things that the people from other parts of the world contribute to society here, we do have elements of people who are deeply racist and unwilling to share and unwilling to accept the reality of the fact that, as we are now and into the future, we're going to be a more diverse place, not least because climate's going to displace people in the time ahead. So the politicians need to take this matter really seriously. And, we're behind in terms of representation for people who aren't white. The statistics that you read earlier just show how, white Northern Ireland is. And, it's understandable to an extent when you're dealing with a post-conflict society that it's not going to be as diverse, not least because people from other parts of the world didn't want to make their homes in Northern Ireland. Like, it was only really some soldiers who may have been Black from the British Army, or people from the Indian or the Chinese community were kind of the first people who were mad enough to make Northern Ireland their home. So, we rely on people from other parts of the world to enrich society and to do jobs and to, be part of life here. But the kind of rhetoric, in the UK and Ireland debates around immigration just needs to be toned down, because everybody's a human, and at the moment, people who are living here from other parts of the world aren't being treated with the respect that they deserve. And we'll have to tackle all those issues around housing and around policing and around racial equality strategies and integration and educating people that difference is okay, and also respecting the fact that people from other parts of the world contribute a lot to the society we live in, whether that is in the health service or in manufacturing or in hospitality or whatever it is they're choosing to do, academia, whatever it is that. That's okay. And a lot of us are comfortable with difference, but clearly there's a significant whack of people that aren't, and all of the complexity of that's going to have to be poured over in the time ahead.
Amanda Ferguson, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you.
Ash, there are really eerie similarities here, right, between these riots and the ones that took place in England and eventually did reach Ireland as well last summer, both triggered by online rumors, both targeting immigrant households and businesses. Is this becoming like a new normal?
So I suppose maybe I want to start by talking about how some of the specifics of the political context in the north of Ireland may be playing out, and then talk about the things which are very much a commonality with what's happening, here on the mainland. So this is from some reporting by Chris Banbury, which was that last summer also saw a loyalist gang target Catholic and African residents in a spate of sectarian and racist attacks in Antrim town that forced at least one family to flee. A campaign of paint bombs, smashed windows, graffiti and threatening posters took place in the Craighill area. What's interesting here is that it wasn't just immigrant households, those who are being perceived as foreign, who are targeted. It was Catholic households as well. So there does seem to be a piece of the puzzle here, which is connected to loyalist sectarian violence and a particular political culture, and it may take longer to fully understand that. The second part, of course, is what is absolutely shared with what's going on here in Great Britain as well. And that is, I think, a pronounced tendency to understand crime and criminality through racial and ethnic lenses in a way which is no longer implicit, but is highly, highly explicit. We saw this with the misinformation which emerged around the Southport stabbings. So first there were falsehoods being spread that the assailant was an asylum seeker, was an undocumented migrant. And then when the name was released and it was Axel Rudakabana, the emphasis was placed on his Rwandan heritage rather than the fact he was born in Wales. And people who suggested, well, that means he's British, means he's Welsh, were laughed out of town because, well, look at him. His skin's dark, his name is Axel Rudakabana, his foreignness simply declares itself. And what is worrying to me is that we've gotten to a point where police forces are compelled to release data or information around ethnicity and nationality much earlier than they ordinarily would, including before charging somebody. So we saw this just a few weeks ago when a driver was I'm trying to stay the right side of contempt of court laws. A man has been charged with an array of offences, including GBH and driving offences. Allegedly drove his car into a crowd of Liverpool supporters who were celebrating winning the Premier League. The police were compelled to release the information that the suspect in custody was white and British, simply because there were so many people football fans in an area, already rumours swirling, speculation that it was somebody of Muslim heritage. And I think they felt compelled to release that information to prevent any outbreaks of disorder of the likes that we saw following the Southport stabbings. That is a highly depressing place to be. And while I understand that particular decision being made by Merseyside Police, what concerns me about it is then that becomes a new normal. So if that information isn't being immediately released and isn't being immediately released pre-charge, that can fuel the rumour mill and I think perhaps even encourage this culture of collective blame. Because I think this is a really important point to make. There is not a right-thinking human being in this country, regardless of race, ethnicity, religion, national origin, who doesn't view crimes against children, violent crimes, sexual crimes, with complete horror. Every single right-thinking person feels that way. And every single right-thinking person wants children to be protected to the absolute fullest of our capability. The difference is when there is a white British offender when it comes to sex crimes or violent crimes, and when it comes to either a British-born or a foreign-born person of colour, is that in the latter case, immigrants and people of colour have to fear collective blame. When there are prolific child sex abusers of the likes of Jimmy Savile, people who are caught up by Operation Yewtree, or even white group-based sexual offenders, of which there are many, you just don't see them reported in the same way. No white person has to worry that someone is going to try and smash up their car or burn their house down. No one has to make clear that I'm not like this white person who's committed this heinous offense, because it's just taken for granted. Whereas the opposite is true, because the only way in which we are encouraged to understand crimes which are committed either by immigrants or people of colour is through the lens of nationality or race. And that is, I think, the political culture which is, I think, driving this kind of violence and driving this kind of, I guess, pogrom that we're seeing, right? What we're seeing right now in Ballymena is a pogrom, and what we witnessed after the Southport stabbings was also a pogrom. Is this way of assigning a kind of collective blame, because it is that sense of collective blame which then leads to collective forms of punishment and mob violence. And unfortunately, that's something which is driven by politicians, establishment media, the very same people who I think are sincere in their condemnations of mob violence and street disorder. They're creating the conditions for that to happen by saying, well, this is how we understand certain kinds of crime. It's not how we understand all kinds of crime. So if ethnicity and race is relevant when you're talking about child sexual offences when committed by people who are not British nationals or people who aren't white, well, automatically that's going to have to apply for white British offenders. Why doesn't it? Well, because it makes no sense. It's equally nonsensical when you're talking about minority groups as well.
Absolutely. What kind of sits at the core of racism in many ways is dehumanization and depersonalization. And part of the experience of being a racialized person is often being taken not as an individual first, but being taken as your identity first, and being held responsible for often the worst perceptions that people hold of the group that you come from. And it's obviously worth iterating this idea that, of course, violence against women and girls is endemic, it is shocking, it is brutal, and it's very, very serious. But racializing the issue is a method of distraction, and it's a method of weaponizing that very real problem for a racist and divisive agenda. Because ultimately, the vision of the world that is held by these far-right politicians or these far-right protesters is not a world in which women and girls are safer. There's this kind of perverse idea that somehow if a sexualized crime or a gender-based crime is committed by someone who's not white, it's somehow more traumatic than if it's committed by someone who's white or someone who's British. And that is deeply perverse. And it's worth really remembering that the holistic politics of the far right is one in which that deeply dehumanizes and devalues women and does not in any way protect women, as much as that might be used as a talking point in order to dehumanize and demonize migrants, particularly migrant and racialized men. Thank you so much for joining me, Ash. Astute and brilliant as ever.
If there's one last thing I could add very, very quickly, this was a headline from Sky News in their coverage of the Ballymena riots. Families flee locals venting their feelings. Venting their feelings. I think that is an absolutely astonishing way to talk about people's houses being burned down. Simply expressing yourself. Simply expressing yourself.
Being authentic. You know, it's the era of authenticity, Ash.
Living my truth.
If your authentic feelings is to, do racist pogroms, then, Brene Brown says, live your authentic self. So it's all cool.
And that's why I'm going to find my nearest leisure centre to attack terrified families, because I got to do me. I just got to do me.
God, that's therapy speak meets far right fascism. It's got to be like the marriage of the worst two things in our society at this point. But thank you, everyone, for tuning in for our show. Make sure you come back tomorrow for another live stream from 6 p.m. For now, you've been watching Novara Media. Good night.